So it really all started for me when I started to look for an astronaut. So I was totally obsessed about giving my grandma an experience of a rocket liftoff inside our living room. You know, my grandma would tell me a lot of stories, my granddad would tell me a lot of stories. And so that's really how I started to be really interested into, you know, performance and theater and, you know, and design as well. And my grandma always been a key player in all of this. And so I hammered them, I sent them billions of emails. And then eventually I came across that man called Jean-Pierre Ignoret, who is a French astronaut who lifted off twice from the Soyuz rocket, and I went to see him talk in London, and I was very lucky because it was the anniversary of the moon landing, so he was in London at that time. And I just turned up and I begged him again and again and again, and then eventually he said to me, listen, okay, that's fine, I can do this project with you. And then we spent a year working on this big monster called the Soyuz share. We give you all the liftoff impression of the Soyuz rocket, stage 1, 2, and 3, before you access weightlessness. This is where I actually really realized that it's so much more interesting to get the experts on board and really build up this giant multidisciplinary team together to actually build, you know, an experience which is as tangible as possible for the public. And I think this is pretty much the way that I approach every single project. Is the more difficult they are, the more challenging they are, the more I will stick with them, the more I will be like a real parasite in them. So it's like nothing absolutely is impossible. It's all about, you know, trying to get the right people on board, coming up with a plan A, B, C, D, and making it happen. Warhol was talking a lot about his up and down moment, you know, the fact that you've got really hyper creative moments, and then you've got the very downside where, you know, like you say, there is this really big feeling of emptiness where you don't know where this is going anymore, where, you know, everybody is dropping out. It's absolutely difficult. And sometimes you feel like you're going into this empty flux of things. And I guess, you know, for me, it's always been about trying to find a way to actually deal with this moment of emptiness. And I do that by doing a lot of sport, something that sort of like keep you happy. You know, it can be a moment where you feel like you're not going to make it, but it's going against your philosophy, so you have to make it happen. When it comes to like the future of the human civilization, I'm quite optimistic. I mean, you can see that in all the projects as well. You know, if I did a project called Disaster Playground, which is all about, you know, the design of emergency procedure in the space program, you can see that actually if I'm doing this, it's also because I want to know whether or not we've got a plan in place. But, you know, what we found doing the project is actually, yes, there is a program which is in place, but unfortunately there is not many people. And so, yes, we need to really understand that there is a real threat, we need to really address it, and we need to actually bring in, you know, the sort of the human power to actually really come up with a real plan. And so, of course, you know, I think asteroid is really interesting when it comes to think about our, you know, our civilization. How do we share that land that we, you know, in which we all, you know, act and live? You know, I don't have an answer in terms of like what it should be looking like. I will hope that we can still remain on Earth for quite a big amount of time, and I will hope that we can actually figure out a plan to actually, you know, coordinate our effort internationally to actually deal with problems. So SETI is a Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, you know, trying to figure out if there is any extraterrestrial intelligence out there. And the way we do it is to actually look at, you know, extraterrestrial signal. If there is a signal that comes from, you know, from elsewhere to us, that means that there is actually an intelligence somewhere that can produce them. So of course, you know, which signal can we think about as being a form of intelligence is always been a discussion in SETI. And I think, you know, this is why it's always been very interesting for me to work as well with this institute, because it will bring in people from the sociological field, people from the linguistic field, people from the pure mathematics field. And Frank Drake came up with this equation, which is about looking at how many potential civilizations are out there. And so each of the components of the equation is looking at the number of planets that might be out there, the number of languages that might be out there. We are getting closer and closer to figure out how many number of civilizations might be out there. For example, the Voyager mission, which was about sending this message. Frank Drake and Carl Sagan were involved in designing it. And back in the days, it was about designing this message called the Arecibo message, which was a mathematical message, you know, like a bilingual and binarial, you know, message like A, 01, 01, 01. You might find that music might be as well a good way to communicate, and that's what happened with Voyager. They were actually inside some music being sent as well out there. You know, when it comes to UFO and all of this, we don't recognize these as being facts. We thought that something was coming from, you know, from extraterrestrial civilization, and it turns out to be a signal coming from the International Space Station. The lifetime of the SETI, we have not actually received any signal coming from space. So which time will I pick if I was to be inside? I think I would have loved to be in prehistorical time. And so, you know, dinosaur, of course, always, you know, I would have loved to be into this Jurassic, you know, park and like actually meet with all the Tyrannosaurus Rex and, you know, communicate with them or study them, how they were, you know, and how we developed from it. The eruption of the volcanoes, everything seemed to be totally chaotic at that time. Renaissance as well, you know, like the boom of the arts and science together working, and then of course, you know, the moon landing. Space has been a clear framework for military, you know, purpose and also, you know, American leadership. Now, of course, you know, it's like we are not in the same context. So when it comes to space, we can think about space just for its military use anymore. For me, it's more about like the communication strategy. You know, between the moment where you actually compile a spaceship together to you send it in space, there is a whole series of process that and a whole methodology that we don't know about because that's not been the focus of the communication campaign. And I will want to actually see this changing, and that's what we try to do with Disaster Playground, is to try and reconnect us with the tragedy component of space exploration and the difficult component of making space happen. And so that's how the International Space Orchestra project I did started, really, and actually get the public to sympathize with us and sympathize with the mission which is in place there. You know, what does it mean to do space nowadays? What does it mean to think about space in the next 20 years? There is one that I think is very fascinating, is something which is happening actually underwater, and it's called hydrothermal vents. And they are basically a place in which you know, we have found some form of life that popped out from the undercrust of the ocean. And I think it's just absolutely fascinating to me that life could have originated from the inside of, you know, of the Earth. So I'm really interested in that at the moment. You know, there is as well synthetic biology, which is all about hacking the DNA of, you know, bacteria and actually make pretty much anything you want out of it. And so that is really exciting, of course. So I come from the public perspective and I look at what we want to experience. So things like, for example, the Large Hadron Collider, which is this gigantic experiment based in Geneva, where you bombard protons at the speed of light. You know, as a member of the public, I want to be there when, you know, the scientists press the red button and you recreate the first second of the Big Bang. You know, I want to feel what it is like to recreate the first second of the Big Bang, and you probably want to as well. So a lot of my work always been about trying to come up with, you know, ways in which we can, member of the public, experience the edge of reality in a way. Well, I guess, you know, because I'm working a lot with engineer and, you know, space operator and in the field of space, it still is very much like, I would say 90% male and then 10% woman. I don't feel that I feel discriminated being a woman, but I will say that I'm not seeing many women around. You know, I think there is still a lot to do in terms of like us, you know, women stepping into this field. Star Wars or Star Trek? I would definitely say Star Wars. Because what I love about Star Wars is like all the critical debate that can be taken out of Star Wars. And so there is all the military use of space, you know, all of this questioning that come from, you know, the word Star Wars itself already that I think are really fascinating.